Hi, I'm Tony Giddens. I'm the director of the Washington, DC International Film Festival. This is our 34th year, and this year we're coming to you virtually, which means that all of our films, all of our presentations will come to you via the internet. It also means you have the opportunity to see these wonderful films from the comfort of your own home. Today, we'd like to talk about a film, 1982 from Lebanon. 1982 is part of our Arabian Sites section. And we have with us today the director of 1982, Mr. Oualid Mouaness. And Oualid lives now in Los Angeles. He was raised between Lebanon and Liberia. And he now makes films. He produces documentaries and he produces short films, some of which have won awards around the world. 1982 is his directorial debut. We saw it at the Toronto Film Festival where it had its world premiere. So we were happy to be able to bring it to Washington, DC. Speaking with Oualid will be my good friend Herbert Niles. Herbert is the associate director of the Office of Cable, Television, Film, Entertainment, and Music. It's a very dynamic office as part of the mayor's administrative office, and it does incredible work. It really helps DC filmmakers and presents all kinds of entertainment and artistic programs here in the district. And Herbert is one of the guys who keeps that going. Herbert actually is a friend of Oualid. They knew each other when they both lived in Los Angeles, worked there in the film industry. And Herbert actually suggested this film to us and asked us to take a look, and it's worked out very well. Here we are today. So you guys have a great conversation. I hope everyone has an opportunity to see the film and to take part in the offerings of this year's Filmfest DC. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony, for the introduction, and thank you for everyone that's joining us for this conversation with Oualid. Tony did a good introduction into some of Oualid's professional background, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about the film. I know that some of you may have already seen the film, and this is what you're watching after you've already watched it. Some of you may be seeing this before you watch. But I just wanted to let you know that 1982 is Oualid's first feature film. It's set against the backdrop of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The film chronicles a day in the life of the students and teachers at a Beirut private school as the military conflict approaches the outskirts of the city. As the invasion approaches, 11-year-old Wissam tries to muster the courage to tell a classmate he loves her, while his teacher, Yesmine, struggles with the impact the political and military upheaval is having on her family and her tenuous romantic relationship with a fellow teacher. The film has won several awards, and it was also Lebanon's official foreign language selection nominee for the 2020 Academy Awards. So thank you, Oualid, for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And if I can say, just a personal observation of the film. I just want to tell everyone that you're in for an incredible cinematic treat. I just want you to know that the film is just enchanting. It's an emotional cinematic experience. The story is engaging, it's emotional, it's lyrical, evocative, and it's always grounded though in a tangible reality that just that really moves you. And it's quite a balancing act to do all of those things, and Oualid did that quite well. And the thing I want to say, Oualid, is that your attention to detail, the thing is, I watched it again a couple of nights ago. Every frame, every visual composition seemed to have a purpose and an intention, right? And it was not just advancing the narrative, but you were also infusing each scene with images and sounds and motifs that just added incredible visual and emotional depth to the story. So it's one of those films that gets deeper and more powerful at additional viewing. So I want to thank you so much for your contribution to the film.
Thank you. This is wonderful to hear, actually, because Yeah, I mean, I work in layers, and I think everything around us speaks, and I tried as much as possible to make the world as real as possible. And I think in real life, our surroundings speak to us more than we think they do. So this is what I wanted to make the film feel like. So thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the film? Of course, I understand that. Tell the audience and the people listening to this interview a little bit about the idea. I know it came from your own personal reminiscences and your remembrances from that day. So tell us a little bit about the idea of the film.
I mean, basically, I wanted. I was talking to a friend of mine in Lebanon, and I was in France, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a producer in Paris about, you know, I mean, Lebanon had just gone through the 2006 war with Israel at the time, which was pretty brutal to a new generation. And we were talking about how each generation has, in Lebanon, has gotten scarred somehow by. And then we were talking about 1982, and because that was, I wasn't in Lebanon in 2006, but I was in Lebanon in 1982, and I was talking about my memory of that day, which was my last day of school in Lebanon. And at the time, I attempted to write a short story about this day, which I wrote back in the 90s. And I'm like, okay, but I could never finish the short story. So as I was talking to this producer in Paris, and she was like, you need to make this into a film. And I'm like, you think there's a film there? And she's like, absolutely, there's a film there. And I wasn't convinced. And then somehow one day, literally one day, I woke up and I decided to just kind of go to that narrative story and open it and start reading it. As I started reading it, it got very emotional, and I realized why I could never finish this story. And then I kind of made the decision that this is a story that needs to be told. The story of 1982 and what happened in Lebanon has never been told from the Lebanese side before, from a human standpoint. There's been documentaries and other films about it, but never a human narrative or a film about it. There were two films that came out from Israel, which I think are actually very powerful films, which was Waltz Bashir and Lebanon. And then I wanted to tell this narrative from a perspective that I knew, which is the perspective of the normal Lebanese person that's trying to survive and live and study and go on with life in spite of everything. And this was my experience. And I felt it needed to be presented to the world in a way that shows us for who we really are. As Lebanese
and I thought that was really important. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, a lot of films try to tell the story of important military or social events from a macro level. And it's easy to intellectualize and become distant when you take it from that perspective. But what you've done by infusing a personal story and have this intense backdrop, it allows all of us that may not be Lebanese or may not have gone through that experience to be able to identify with the children's experience or to identify with the teachers and the administrators' experience. And it just, it adds a power and a depth to the story that it makes it impossible to detach from it. And I think that's one of the wonderful strengths to the story and your decision to approach it in the way that you did. I did want to talk a little bit about, because this is a film festival and a lot of the films are independent. I wanted to talk a little bit about the journey. And if you could tell us a little bit about from the idea and waking up that morning to the screen, there's the screenwriting, there's finding the money, there's casting up, there's crewing up, there's actual filming, that long journey for an independent filmmaker. Tell us a little bit about what it was like and all the people that helped you along the way. I know that you were involved in the Sundance Labs as well. Tell us a little bit about that journey from idea to this finished film.
Yeah, well, it took 8 years to make this film. From the moment I made the decision to put pen to paper as a script. I was very lucky in that the first draft of the script immediately made it into the Sundance Lab from the Middle East. The moment that made it into the Sundance Lab from the Middle East, it immediately kind of shed a light on the material. And then it became sort of it was about financing the film. And it was one of those films. It's a Lebanese film. It talks about, it's kind of a small story. It's a love story. On the surface, the story is like your average love story between a boy and a girl and whatnot. So people were like, well, you know, it's special. And I knew that there was something much deeper to explore in this narrative. And of course, you're trying to convince people to give you money to make this film as you're trying to raise money. And it took about 4 years, 4 years to finance the money, to have enough money to actually get it to film, which we filmed in 2017. The issue was that every year, if the financing didn't close, then we had to wait another year because it's kids, it's a school, you needed everybody to be free. And at the same time, the stars need to align. We tried to go the European co-production route. We tried to mix different kinds of configurations for producing this film. We went for grant funding in France, in Qatar, in Norway, in Lebanon, to try to get as many grants as possible to try to get this film done, because part of the vetting process of the film usually for festivals as an independent film and as an international film is actually the funds. Once you get the funds, it kind of gives you that much more visibility. It makes investors that much more interested. It keeps people confident. But people came in and out of the process from production as producers. Some stayed, some couldn't stay, and some they were exhausted by the process. And I just had to keep going. Yeah. And at one point, I would get, people were like, oh my God, this guy is still trying to raise money for this film after 4 years of doing markets and festivals and meetings. And then finally, I managed to make the film. And it took, we had the money for production, so we finished the production. And as we were doing the post-production, we were continuing to raise money to see the film through. So the post-production process took about 1.5 years. And then the casting was a very interesting process because...
Well, tell us, the one thing before you talk about that, talk a little bit about, Nadine Lalaki. All of you, many of you should know that she is an international star of incredible proportions, and also a celebrated and honored filmmaker and director in her own right.
Correct.
Tell us about landing that great attachment. And I can only imagine, did the young actors know
no.
you were going to be acting with them? Were they starstruck? For American audiences, I don't know. It'd be like if Jennifer Lawrence or, walked in and was going to be acting with you. So tell us about the journey, getting her attachment, and what it was like working with her.
I had met Nadine socially back in 2011, and it was just so there was something organic about the way we met. We met in a social situation in Lebanon. We kind of peripherally knew each other, and then 2013 was when I felt I had a script that was almost ready to shoot, and then one of my executive producers is very good friends with her. I knew her, but I knew her sort of socially. We ran the same circles, but it wasn't to the point where I'm like, hey. And then I was having a conversation with someone who was coming in to back the film, and she was very good friends with Nadine, and she set it up. So on the next trip to Lebanon, I met up with Nadine. She read the script, she loved it, and that was 2013. And at the time, she had just started thinking about doing Capernaum, which was her movie that was nominated for the Oscar the year before, and then time went on, and then she managed to do her film, and she was in post-production when I managed to do mine, and I wasn't sure if she was going to be able to be a part of it. And then she's like, let me reread it. She reread it. She's like, I still love this material. And then she's like, just let me know what your dates are, because she was in the middle of the post-production, the massive post-production of Capernaum, which was a very, very long process as well. And then when I gave her my dates so happened to be exactly the days she was taking off from editing the film. So I think the stars sort of aligned, and to be quite honest, she was one of the most gracious, wonderful dream of an actor for another director to work with, and she trusted me, and I think that's pretty amazing. And it was a pleasure, actually. she's what was great about it is she sort of understood the core of this narrative, because we both went through it. We're both the same age, the same generation, so we both experienced it, though in different schools. We experienced it in the same way, in the having to be evacuated on that day and having to leave this. And so for us, it was very raw memory, and it was emotional. And directing her was just really, really a pleasure, because when we talked in between takes, I mean, just her being a director, she kind of knew exactly how to calibrate, and it was just wonderful. And then we didn't tell the kids it was her.
Oh, you didn't?
So everybody's like, who's playing Miss Yesmine? Who's playing Miss Yesmine? Who's playing Miss Yesmine? So when we start shooting the classroom, everybody, all the kids are in class, and in walks Nadine Lebeki. And all the kids were like, oh my God, this is Nadine, it's Nadine. So it was very, very cute. And then,
that must have been wonderful.
Yeah. And then, because we were keeping it,
yeah, go ahead.
We were keeping it very under wraps, because we knew that the parents would be more excited about the kids playing. They're like, oh my kid, playing in Nadine Lebeki, in a film with Nadine Lebeki. So we didn't really want to publicize that. We just wanted it to be very organic. And at that point, the kids were trained enough to kind of like take it, and we calmed them down, and they're like, we're all equal here. Like, and she was wonderful with them as well. Like she would like, she really was just, she played along with them. She knew that they were going to be starstruck at first, but then they all sort of came very down to earth, and they did a fantastic job.
That's great. Well, I want to touch on something briefly that you said about that shared experience. You said one of the things that connected Nadine to the material was that this is sort of a seminal time for that generation of Lebanese people. It's almost like they're 9/11 to a certain degree.
Right.
What is your experience when you get so caught up in a project and developing and making such an intimate story, when all of a sudden you're going to festivals and you're seeing screenings, and particularly your screenings in the Arab world? What was it like, the experience to see other Arabs and specifically other Lebanese people experience that film together? And what were some of the things that people told you and their reactions to seeing the film?
It's very interesting. It was very, very emotional. Like a lot of people just completely, a lot of Lebanese people of my generation broke down when they saw the film. And of the older generation, they also broke down, because it's just like the film really, and this is something that I wanted to do, is I wanted to create a level of naturalism in the film, particularly in the first part of the film, where you become so embedded in the world that you almost know it, so that in the second part of the film, your entire world is upended. And that's sort of, I wanted to be as true to my memory and as true to the experience, the human experience of this moment. So the screens were very, very, very emotional. And there were people who really could not talk after the film. The strange thing is, I haven't experienced the screening of this or not, because of the situation.
Okay, I think we have a little bit of buffering, Oualid. So why don't we wait to see if you can come back, and there we go. Why don't you finish your thought?
Okay.
I think you're back now.
Yeah. The interesting thing is basically that I haven't experienced this film in Lebanon. With an audience in Lebanon. I've experienced it with people abroad like myself, and in the Arab world, and the response has been very strong, very emotional. A lot of people have said that this is the first time they actually see a representation of our differences as Lebanese people done so eloquently and truthfully on screen, which for me was very important, because I didn't want to make a film that would create conflict and point fingers as much as a film that just states very factual, that implies very factually the differences and the schisms in Lebanese society and how we have to overcome them. So this is something that really, really spoke on a very profound level to a lot of Lebanese people. And yeah, so.
Well, good. Well, I think that we're at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much, Oualid, for sharing this film with all of us. I think that the Filmfest DC audience will really enjoy the film. And thank you for your time this morning to talk to us.